All right, let us start now. It's 2 minutes past. I'm going to share just some slides to get us going. So welcome to Monday Live. My name is Anto Budiarjo. So this is a conversation that we started a few months back to help us all get through the pandemic, and also to try and figure out what's on the other side of COVID for commercial buildings. So that's the mission. The profiles of the people that are speaking are on mondaylive.org. And just a reminder, the views expressed here are personal, not of any organization or company. Please do post your questions and comments on the Zoom Q&A and chat tools. And if possible, complete the survey at the end. This slide deck will be is actually on mondaylive.org if you want to see what's some of the links that the members of this group has put up. So the agenda for today, we'll spend 10 minutes or so talking about news and trends. And I was shocked to see that this week marks the six-month anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic by WHO. So 6 months has passed. I'll show you, after that, I'll show you the results of the survey, and then we'll talk about selling smart buildings to the C-suite, which is the main focus of today's show. So a few slides just with links and comments from the members. This is Ken Sinclair talking about trust, which is the theme of next month's automated buildings. Scott is talking about an article by the Harvard Business Review on Microsoft in terms of their thinking right now. I saw this morning, and I thought that's quite a shock in terms of another year that Google allow people, their employees, to work at home. Also saw this article in IEEE Spectrum. There's actually quite a lot of interesting data in there if you want to check it out. Roger's talking about Lend-Lease launching a new platform. Anna is talking about some insights from Cushman Wakefield, mostly from the APAC region. Therese talking about schools, and that's it. So get back to the team. So what are we seeing right now in terms of news and trends that are sort of interesting with regards to our industry and the pandemic?
That Google announcement was quite striking. That's an entire year from now of their organization working remotely.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Although, Google, and as a leading tech player, is a little bit of an outlier in terms of how most people behave, but it's still quite surprising.
Yeah, I think on one of the slides I put up, or in the slide I put up there, it's actually talking about people are just not ready to go back. So I think there's a general feeling from both sides, both from the tenants and the people who actually own the buildings, that could be some time before people go back. It's a whole stack of information, both taking surveys from the staff level and also the owners and the occupiers. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and that Cushman Wakefield thing, if you get a chance, click on that link. There's an audio for us. They did an hour session on this with a lot of Q&A and some interesting feedback on their take on their from their survey of remote workers, and will they go back? And there's some interesting numbers. About 73% still want a flexible environment afterwards, and more importantly, the changing view of what they think the workplace should be when they do go back. So there's some interesting case in there to have a look at.
I had an interesting conversation with one of the bigger MSIs here, which kind of relates back to, the Lend-Lease thing that's on there is talking about them actually offering a SaaS model. And we talked about some of the things that may block the thing. And, a big one obviously is the contractual change with mechanical contractors and things. and it was interesting, the MSI said that he's now getting work both from a consultancy and also vetting tenders for contractors now, because they recognize they don't have the skill set for some of the things that the customers and the REITs are actually asking for. And they're asking them to actually come in because, you know, the customers are asking for this, they don't know what they're looking at. So they're looking for people to actually come in and vet, you know, as the technology and the demands for well-being and everything else coming in, and all the things that need to be integrated there, they're being challenged. So that's a good thing that they're being under pressure to actually at least begin to look at, you know, what is actually required in a building today, rather than just, you know, the hydraulics and the electricals.
Yeah, the link that I shared, or the IEEE link, had quite a lot of sort of information and that they post to a number of different companies. And what was striking to me was a theme that we've seen over the past few weeks that we've talked about, is that it's not consistent. You know, some companies are completely opposite to other companies or groups of people about how they see this. So that pattern of inconsistency continues, which is quite interesting, I thought.
In the Microsoft article that I posted, there's some interesting statistics and data that they've shared, and they're seeing a new night shift, meaning a lot of instant messaging was happening between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. And now that has shifted to a 52% increase in instant messaging between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight. There's also a significant, well, at least from a data perspective, employees have seen the time that they're required to work on weekends, the amount of time triple. Now, it went from a low of 10 minutes to all of 30 minutes, but still, there's an encroachment because of the kind of that blurry effect of your work-life kind of balance now that you're working from home. So it'll be interesting to see how those trends change and morph over time.
So
The other one,
Ken, that speaks to your in-between bases, and this is kind of in-between behaviors, right, Ken?
Yeah, the other thing I think that has happened too is that people have positioned themselves in some logical position close to their workspace. It's probably like a compromise, and compromise is where their kids go to school. And the bottom line is they're not all that happy in that space if in fact they're going to spend more time in it. So that maybe needs to be rethought. The in-between is an interesting area because there is also all in that same article, Scott, thanks for sharing that. The same article, they point out just the whole social side is that part of the reason we went to work was to get away from the kids and wife, and that we don't want to lose that. So there is a need for an in-between social space. I perceive that will evolve to close community, and the close community will be something you can bike or walk or hike or even in a pinch drive to, but not an hour, 10 minutes or something like that. And we'll start to see that. Also for the younger folks, the in-between will evolve to being the beach or the woods or by a creek or the place that they like to do. So there's a whole adjustment that has to happen. And any of us that have worked remotely, as I have since 1975, you kind of just blend your whole life around that. You never really start working and you never really stop working. It just becomes part of your life.
I did like the other metric, Scott, in there, that the length of time of company meetings have gone from typically 1 hour to 30 minutes. They've gone down, right? The length of time. The number have gone up, but the length have shortened. And they were kind of attesting that to, you know, do we really need to be here for an hour? Do I need to be? There's more questioning of people on the meetings, which, you know, should be the type of thing you do normally, but it's become more relevant with the remote learning and remote working.
Absolutely. And the last part of the article talks about a culture shift, right? So, and part of that, is, do we really need to have 1 hour meetings? I mean, that's being discussed internally, has been prior to COVID at JLL. Do we really need to be here for an hour? Can we get what we need accomplished in 30 minutes? And maybe you need to set up a couple of sidebar meetings for 15 minutes, but surely be respectful of other people's time and don't just automatically book an hour for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and they decompose that into that, to your point, that, 2 one-on-one meetings at 15, 30 minutes was a lot more productive than just having everyone sit down for an hour in the conference room.
Yep. For sure.
Okay, so let us move on. So I sent everybody, all of the attendees, an email with a survey. This is a conversation that we've been having the last few weeks about as a service model, SaaS or otherwise. And the discussion internally has been sort of what are the barriers to that? And so the results of this survey, it's a pretty simple survey, it's not very scientific, is quite interesting. Let me share it with you. Basically, the ones that have got the most votes is the CapEx, OpEx paradox, as the question is posed, and then the second is the fact that we haven't really incentivized the channel, or the channel isn't structured so that it's incentivized to do this. Followed closely by the procurement process, and then all of the other questions, sort of as you can see there. So this is not a million miles away from the sort of the thoughts of the group when we discussed it internally. So maybe you can just spend 5 minutes talking about this before we move on to the C-suite question. Anybody want chime in any additional thoughts on this? Is it surprising?
Sorry, can you put it up again, Anto? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll do that. It's too quick there.
Thanks.
CapEx, OpEx is number one with 70%.
Can you explain what you mean by the paradox of that a little bit, Anto?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if that's the right way to frame it, but it's the sort of the issue that a lot of our business is really a CapEx issue. Because a lot of systems go in at the initial build or in major refurbs, and as a service model is something that's more aligned to operational expenditures, so OpEx. So there's kind of a conflict there as to how an industry that's generally speaking selling CapEx can move to OpEx.
And I suppose the challenge always is that if it's just not software and data, there is a cost associated with it somewhere, and who bears that upfront cost?
Yeah, that's a key part of that.
It would be interesting to ask from this group as to which of these would be easiest to solve of that list. Is it easier to solve to incentivize the channel, or the CapEx, OpEx, or the procurement process? Which would be, if we were to tackle one or two of them.
Any thoughts on that, group?
Well, I can tell you for the business I'm running, the incentivizing the channel is a major part of our strategy. And it's really revolves around helping them to make money selling service agreements. Mm-hmm. So it's, yeah, that's structuring it, whether the specific structure that we put together is the right one or not, we'll find out over time. But in terms of attractiveness, when we present the program to them, the channel partners are finding it something they'd like to participate in. So at least so far, so good. But I think it's just a question of putting something together that shows how they can make money selling service.
I think when I was engaged in my former company, and they included service, maintenance in it with free updates, and it was included in the price for a couple of years. The whole customer base went crazy, saying you can't do this. This is trying to trap us in, to lock us into things. And I think that's some way. I think it's not just incentivizing. I think it's also educating a little bit as well.
I'd add that on the CapEx, OpEx, there's still a need to kind of educate or separate or define the difference, because equipment usually is associated with the CapEx side of things, and that certainly could still happen while still supporting and embracing an OpEx model when it comes to the services and the ongoing value proposition. So, and then kind of blending the two together really becomes an issue of financing. Who finances, who owns. It can be done as a simple lease. It can be, manufacturer owned equipment. That's where we get into some of the problems that some of the guys are talking about. Who owns my equipment that's on my building? That can be an issue. But I think that the real way to break this is to clearly define when the value is being delivered. If it's all an upfront value, as in the equipment, then that's really aligns better with CapEx. If it's an ongoing value delivery, that has to be some kind of an OpEx model. It can't be procured as easily upfront.
Anto, would that unknown process / business bar be part of the unincentivized channel or CapEx, OpEx paradox? Would that be related?
It could be. And the way we structured the survey is people would have multiple choices. And it'll be interesting to see if people have, what combinations people have answered. I think one of the sort of the undercurrent of this discussion is that we're in an industry, not only that what we sell is typically CapEx, but obviously, because of that, the habits and the structure of whether it's compensation or sort of dealer-vendor relationship and everything else is all revolves around CapEx. So it's kind of difficult structurally to do something different like OpEx. And I think a lot of my sort of thoughts about the unknown process and unknown sort of business side of things is mostly to do with the fact that SaaS is generally speaking unknown to this business that is CapEx oriented, and sort of that's kind of the way I see that question. And it's quite surprising that that's got quite a lot of votes. Okay, so let us move on. So the main topic of today is sort of came out of an internal conversation last week of this group, is thinking about selling to the C-suite. And it kind of relates a lot to, the procurement process and some of the other questions that was on the survey. This group sort of felt generally that we're not talking to the right audience. And sort of my two questions on this conversation is, first of all, why is that, and why do we need to go there? And if we do, then how? So I thought we'd start with the why side of it, and I think the individual in this group that's actually spoken most eloquently about the need to target the C-level executives is Jim Lee. So I thought I'd throw that question first to Jim. Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to talk to the C-suite?
Well, I think that it's a really interesting question, Anto. And if you look at the past 30 years of technology, as a planet, we've spent trillions of dollars on enterprise management, technology, software, consulting. What does that do? That enterprise technology concentrates decision-making at the tops of organizations. I'm sure everyone on the call is aware that the amount of money that people are allowed to spend in an organization has become less and less over time. I have a friend who was CFO of a $10 billion energy company. And was a mining company. And this company, any expenditure over $50,000 had to cross his desk. We've seen many other large corporations now that have moved a number up, and that moving the number is actually equivalent to taking power away from people lower down in the organizations, right? So in the old days, a manager of facilities had a budget, both operating and capital, and they had the decision, they had discretionary authority on that. And eventually that sort of was taken away and it went to the director level guy. And eventually that was taken away and it went to the vice president. And eventually it was taken away so that by the time you need to make any germane decision in your organization, it's going to the C-suite. Now the problem you get into is that when you concentrate that organization at the top, you've basically neutered all the levels down below. Not only will they not make a decision, they're afraid to make a decision. And your only redress here is to go to the top because they are the ones that control everything. They believe they can control it because they have this enterprise technology which they believe gives them visibility. Unfortunately, what that does is it leaves out all of those knowledgeable people that are lower down in the organization that used to make those decisions. Long answer, sorry.
Great. People agree with that, or?
Certainly that financial decision gets made at the C-suite, but I do believe that those decisions are still being made with some of those individuals being influencers in that decision, right, Jim? So you still have those, on-site level employees or director level employees that you have to sell to them your solution as well, because they're ultimately going to influence the decision that's made by the C-suite from a pure financial perspective.
Agree completely, Scott. Necessary, but not sufficient to get a deal done.
Correct.
Part of the paradox here that we talked about too is the lower level on-premise decision makers, if you will, or influencers, have the technical knowledge to understand what they're purchasing and what the value proposition really is. The higher you go up the chain towards the C-suite, the simpler you have to make your messaging, the simpler you have to make your description of what you're doing, and it loses the subtlety and everything becomes very generic at that level, which kind of loops us back into push it down to a purchasing procurement process, because it looks like all of these solutions are the same to me. When we know as purveyors of those technologies that that's not the case. So finding the balance between that, and I think it's not just do you sell at one level or even do you sell at all levels. I think there's a sequence of operations that has to follow when you're properly doing this, because you have to get the technical understanding into the organization somewhere at some level in order to be successful ever at pitching to a higher level. At least that's been our experience.
So I have a different twist on that, Tracy. I think when we've approached at the C-suite level, and I agree with you 100%, you have to dumb down the message and you have to make it very clear what your proposition is, what the ROI is in terms that are easily understood by them, of course, which is really, really important. And it does, oddly enough, it does make you have to work harder to refine your message and your story so for them to understand in that process, which is a good thing, because you can get lazy if you don't. But what I find then is they once you get past that barrier, then they hand you back to the facility level guys to be the gatekeepers of the technological decision. Why is this? You guys look at this and tell me why it's better. And we find a lot of success doing that way. That if we get some endorsement up from the C-suite, that once going down to the facility level, they can say they can't say yes, but they can say no, right? I mean, they can look at your stuff and they say, well, it won't work, and therefore that's the end of the game. If they like it and they say yes, that's not the last decision point. So I think the decisioning on whether your technology is different, better, faster, cheaper, whatever the advantage is still handed back to the technical team within the organization.
So you're saying basically the C-suite can't really say yes because they don't know enough?
No. The C-suites can say yes. It's when they hand it to the facility guy for the review, the facility guy, typically his no carries weight. His yes is like, okay, fine, we passed the gate, but his no is definitely a gate that you have to go through.
So it is right. The C-suite people can't actually say yes. They can only say yes as long as everybody agrees.
It's a conditional yes, and that sequence is what I was talking about, Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen incidents where they take the technical person and turn it into C-suite. Then the technical group becomes just installers almost.
So
I'm sorry. I think the other thing you have to think about is your value proposition germane to the business? Does it make enough difference, or does it get shunted aside because what you're doing is not core enough for the business? And I think that's a decision that quickly gets made at the C-suite as well.
It's not that focused either, because the guy, when you get to the C-suite, the guy's saying, hey, should I spend some money on this or a marketing campaign for our own products and things, and gets challenged less down when it's in the right channels within the business. But when it gets to that level, sometimes the guy just saying, as I think Jim just said, is, how important is it to us? I think that again is probably a little bit of education with things like, at least now they recognize cybersecurity threats and maybe well-being of staff are becoming important. But when the traditional business could have been a trade-off of, hey, we've got to spend it on what we do as in the core business.
As a sales professional, that's our job, is to help the C-suite understand, yes, maybe you had earmarked funds for this, but this is why you should shift those funds to this project and my technology that I'm proposing for these reasons. And if you do that well and you craft that message well, and by the way, just as companies are buying as a team, it's also important that you sell as a team. So it's important that you bring in key personnel during those meetings to speak the vernacular, talk the language that person is used to hearing, because it helps build the credibility and the trust of the product or the service that you're selling to the organization.
Scott, I guess the question for you is in your business, obviously you're not in the normal contractual chain because you're not in construction. You're dealing more with the customer, but pretty close to them. Have you seen much change in this approach from the C-suite as opposed to, the lower levels making decisions over the past couple of years or so?
It falls very much in line with what Jim talked about. More and more people are losing their authority, and or the authority is shifting from, within buildings, we're all seeing it. That authority level is shifting from the FM team more over to the IT team. And so is the budget, right? So, if you're selling into a building or into a company that manages buildings or owns buildings, you have to have the IT team involved right up front, or you're going to miss the boat.
But the IT team are getting reduced as well, because most of what they used to do on-prem is now shifted to the cloud. So they've got some different functionality of their own.
That's true. And in fact, I'll just throw a scenario out real quick. I was talking to a buddy that just went to work for a very large national apartment REIT. And they're in the process of shifting all of their IT over to both AWS and Microsoft Azure. But not only that, they're implementing new technology on site at their apartment communities so that someone can come in, schedule a tour, pick up an iPad, and the iPad becomes the virtual assistant. Instead of having a leasing agent tour you around the property, the iPad gives you the tour physically as you walk through a particular chosen path through the property and gain access into one of their model apartment homes.
Should be able to do it with VR sooner rather than later as well.
So very interesting.
There
So
was,
in terms-
sorry, I was just gonna say, there's a comment that Rick LeBlanc made that I think is important in this, and it reflects what Roger was talking about too, which is sometimes it's not just how do you fare against the competition, it's how do you fare against my other investments that I have to make too. And that's where what really differentiates the C-suite, I think, is what Rick's message is from the other decision makers or influencers, which I agree. I know personally we have lost business, so to speak, because there was some other higher priority that the organization was focused on at the moment, spending money on or spending time on.
And there again, Tracy, that's why it's so important to ask those pointed questions when you do get into the C-suite. What are your business priorities? What are they for the next 3 years? Because maybe I don't have an opportunity right now. Maybe my opportunity is in 2 years. And then how do you, right, keep the focus and keep them interested? Because 2 years is a long time.
Well, and you know, I've been on both sides of that. When people are pitching something to our company, quite often the answer is, you know, right now we're so busy focused on doing this implementation over here. I really don't even have time to think or resources to put on evaluating what you're trying to pitch me today. So the timing, you often get that as sort of a no, but it's really not a no completely. It's more of a no, not right now. And understanding and following through with that makes all the difference in the world, right?
Yep.
So.
I think another dimension I get, and Rick's brought this up just too, another dimension I see too is when we say C-suite, that's a pretty broad term. I mean, there are different competing entities within the C-suite that are competitive with each other. We find a lot more CIOs now becoming involved. We find sustainability people are being elevated to C-suite level, or the role of sustainability goes to C-suite. So it's important to, you know, where in that C-suite organization you're aiming.
And also understand what the company's business objective is from a revenue standpoint, right? I mean, I think we've probably all read the book Good to Great, and there's a ton of examples in there about how, you know, one of them I'll point out, Walgreens looked at their business and said, look, we should be looking at revenue per customer visit. And so if you understand how the company is calculating their revenue or what they value the most, and then being able to tie your pitch into that to show the value of your system or of your service, certainly is part of that disruptive sales process that you've got to hone.
Yeah, I have a wonderful case study for you, Scott. Years ago, we did a pitch to a very high-end retail store with a very small footprint operating in high-cost areas. We did an energy analysis, and we kind of did a, here's how much energy you can save per store. And the guy looked at it and goes, dude, I can sell 2 more scarves and make that money.
I was going to say, we've had similar things where quite often the decision is not so much against us, but it's for another priority in the restaurant industry specifically. You know, people who come pitching new ways to enhance their revenue as opposed to ways to cut their expenses do a much better job on the retail side.
So I know in previous discussions, John Petsy, who's on vacation this week, has sort of brought up this sort of issue that inherently what we're selling, regardless of which of the companies here on the panelists and the attendees, are quite complex systems or quite complex sort of solutions, right? Which makes it harder to get to, you know, to push wherever it needs to be. How much does that impact the sort of the relevance of the C-suite? It's sort of quite a significant way, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it's huge, Anto. I mean, we're talking about a complex sale. You know, weeks ago I'd mentioned the book Mastering the Complex Sale by Jeffrey Thal, and it covers a lot of the points that have already been mentioned here in terms of covering everybody in the value chain, but it definitely involves the C-suite. You've got to get early to the C-suite and get them to actually create so essentially, they have to tell the lower levels of the organization to go look at this. So they need to be bought in early, not at the end of the process, but really at the beginning of the process. And you need to be able to make a case to them as to whether you're going to drive the revenue, you're going to save the money, or you're going to minimize risk. And hopefully it's going to align with something that, as Rick LeBlanc just mentioned and Tracy just mentioned, aligns with their overall objectives as an organization. But they will, if they engage facilities and engage IT, as whatever the case may be, in the process, you're on your way. Now you still have to make the case. You have to identify a problem. You then have to make the problem something that they want to avoid, and then you have to show them how in the future it's going to be a great benefit to them. So because that's the journey, that's what they call the progression of change. So right now in the current present, they're looking like, hey, things are okay, right? So you're walking in the door and you're saying things really aren't so okay. Well, you got to get somebody to buy in that things really aren't so okay. And then you have to prove it to the point where it's so painful, they want to make a change. And then having gotten to that point, you're telling them, when you make this change, here's what your future is going to look like. And that is, and when people don't get to that point where they're balancing doing nothing versus avoiding this pain, if the pain isn't great enough, they won't act. And that's a tough process to run, but that's the journey we're suggesting we all take here to get this kind of movement in the industry. And it's not an easy thing to do. That's why Jeffrey Thal's made a lot of money selling the book, because teaching people how to run that playbook, if you will, from a sales standpoint, is anything but trivial. But a lot of the comments that have been made here already on this call reflect a fundamental understanding of what I'm talking about, or what he's talking about.
But I guess, Steve, we have now more opportunities in our industry. Traditionally, if you go back a number of years, the best thing we could actually offer was, hey, we can save you some energy and look at and they never seemed to get the fact that would affect your bottom line. It was always pay lip service to it until they kind of needed to be seen to be green kind of thing. Then that became important because they didn't want all the lights on the building on or smoke coming out the top. But there are more things now that the C-suite will be aware of, as we said earlier, cybersecurity, well-being, the importance of, keeping staff and the environment they're working in. So we got perhaps more things to go to them that they will understand more about now than, go and talk to the guy about a PID control loop and the heating valve open at the same time as the cooling valve, and he's gonna, oh guys, he's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
I was just saying, one of the tools, and it won't apply to all circumstances, less so if you're just selling to commercial building owners, but we were selling to owners within a retail market space. So it's a little bit different. So let me preface my comment with that. But we created a tool that took their energy savings, to your point, Roger, which is kind of boring, mostly. But we equated that to a number of transactions, whether they sell burgers or they're a convenience store or whatever it might be. There are published numbers on the net profit made from each transaction, the average transaction size. So we did a little spreadsheet that said, look, for what we're proposing and the amount you're saving, that equates to 600 new transactions based on your averages per month. And that's forever. So what kind of a marketing campaign or what other investment can you do that will produce that kind of result? And that tended to open people's eyes and take this a little bit more seriously, rather than just somebody else, claiming to cut my expenses kind of a thing. It didn't work all the time, but it did some of the time.
Yeah.
I think that point I was going to make is that when dealing with the C-suite, time constants are very important. A year is an eternity in a publicly run company. So if you're up at the C-suite at a large organization If it's not going to have a material short-term effect on what they're doing, they're not interested in it right now. And I think where we've run into the most trouble is a point that was alluded to before, which is they have a much broader visibility into where they're going. And I'll give you an example. The best way to save energy in a pharma plant is not to deploy my analytics. It's to close the plant. And what typically happens is that these are decisions that are being made at such a scale with such an effect on the organization and the communities that they won't be honest with you about it because they can't, right? So they're not going to share that your great value proposition doesn't synchro mesh with the imperatives of their organization. That's very hard to know. And, for a lot of reasons, they can't actually be honest with you about where they're going. Sometimes it just comes back no.
That time parameter, Jim, is you're 100% right with the C-suite. You have to be quick and fast, but also it's critical in that evaluation cycle, right? If you're proposing some ROI or you're proposing some plan, they want to see results quickly too, right? You can't get the proposal and then say, okay, it's going to take 6 to 12 months before I can show you results. They need quick, fast results that they can bring back internally as well.
The pitch has got to be very clear, because first getting access to these guys is almost impossible. When you do, you've got a little amount of time to actually get in and really put the killer thing in there that's going to make him want to do it. Like Tracy was just saying, hey, you're going to have to go and sell X amount of these just to actually do this. That has got to be something that grabs them, because if you don't do that in that short amount of time you've got of their attention span, it'll go away.
So Scott made a comment earlier that may be good to explore. He said that the buying process is typically collaborative or consensus kind of process within the customer organization. But the selling process from the vendors or vendors also need to be sort of collaborative in nature, different parts of the story. In this kind of sort of group where we're all kind of different companies, I'm wondering if we can sort of leverage that and sort of make it not just somebody trying to sell one particular piece of the puzzle that may be not very relevant, but telling a bigger story of how the sort of the vision or the deliverables that we can all collaborate, and maybe not all every time. Does that help the process of selling to the C-suite or to any level?
I'm not sure if this is the same thing that you're saying, Anto, but I think it is. When I was thinking about this subject today before I get on, I was thinking not so much specifically what we've done, but collectively what we need to do to grow the pie for all of us. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a perfect example of that thinking, and it's admittedly not present currently in the groups that we're selling to, I think, for the most part. But when we first started working in the restaurant space, we were working on a food safety project with a particular brand. We get all the way through that, and it was working quite nicely. And we thought for sure, this is one of those things, they paid for it, they're going to want to keep it. It gives them an advantage. They can keep their customers much safer, never have to go through another incident like they had in the past. And when we finally asked that question, we assume that this is how you're thinking. They, to our surprise, came back and said, no, this is an industry issue. The better everybody in the industry does, the more we will sell. If my competitor has a customer who gets sick from bad food because the temperature wasn't properly maintained, my sales go down. Doesn't matter whether it was their burger or their practices, my sales go down. So I feel pitching and getting the education across in our industry about the value of SaaS and what it can bring and how it impacts financials very differently is something that we all should be promoting and educating for the good of the pie, the size of the pie, not just I've got a temporary strategic advantage because I've figured something out here today. So
rising tide and all that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's great, Tracy.
And I suppose, how do we go about, do you think, Tracy, or anyone really, is getting access to the people to actually, that sort of education you were talking about, to actually make sure that the industry of which they're working in actually understands the issues and why they may need some of these things? It's at the moment, obviously, it's difficult, but even before, conferences didn't attract those guys. Conferences were for industry people. You got to be able to reach beyond that, the traditional industry, to get that education at that level.
So Paul says on the chat that you need a bigger story that is purely financial, which is one way of looking at it. But the store is the two words there is story and financial. There definitely has to be a story, a big sort of a cohesive story, and it has to be relevant from a financial or a business perspective.
Yep.
But the premise of this conversation is helping BAS companies and service providers sell to the C-suite. And I haven't heard a perspective yet. I have a perspective on the matter as it relates to selling directly into the C-suite as it relates to energy. So do you know my background at Constellation, and we formed the demand response business unit, and we worked with many of the BAS companies to understand market dynamics around demand response and demand management. The challenge was to get BAS companies, systems integrators, control contractors, to match the sophistication of their customers. And the sophistication of their customers was not necessarily a consensus building decision within the C-suite. It had to do with the energy buyer. So I developed a little bit of a matrix here to help the BAS companies understand how to match that sophistication. And really, it's a roadmap, and it describes three things simultaneously. One is the business model, the technology model, and the flow of money model, the revenue model, as it relates to the energy industry.
Do you want me to put up that slide?
Yeah, do that, Anto, and I'll talk to that very briefly. But basically, we refer to this as the stairway to heaven. I put this together some years ago, but basically, it was put together to help understand what exactly are we selling to the facility, and we have to match that sophistication. So there's been a lot of comments on this call about finding the right person to talk to. And if you have a conversation with the energy buyer, this is the world he lives in. Down in the lower left, there's a progression up to the right. So most of the companies are mired in the efficiency model, which is I'm going to improve your BAS system, and I'm going to create some very simple capabilities to reduce energy. I'm going to install energy efficient lights and motors, and I'm going to change set points, and I'm going to manage your building automation system with that context. The financial delta there is the money you would have spent if you hadn't put in this either OPEX or CAPEX investment to improve your BAS system. The next level is demand management. We all know from the demand response programs, you need your BAS system to do certain things to shed load. That has nothing to do with energy efficiency. It's not a commissioning or a monitoring-based commissioning service, and it's certainly not installing energy efficient lights and motors. It's the ability of your building automation system to operate in the context of the energy market, and there are quite a few incentives around that in the competitive markets. That has emerged very quickly in some of the ISOs into an energy management scenario where you're talking about dynamic pricing models. If your BAS system is not able to receive a real-time hour or day-ahead pricing signal, you're still living in the 1990s. The BAS system's traditionally set up for temperature control, things like that. Another variable needs to be energy pricing. And the BAS needs to be able to modulate itself in the context of that pricing for risk mitigation and also to take advantage of very low index pricing in the market. Now we're heading into firm resources of batteries and storage. So an energy buyer is going to be paying particularly attention to these renewable resources in the context of how it's going to help them manage and shape their load. The BAS system needs to be in tune with that in order to create the optimal load duration curves. This is not rocket science, it's simply understanding how the energy markets work. And finally, we come to intermittent resources in the form of solar and wind. Is your BAS tuned to understand what to do in case the wind stops blowing? Do we trim the load or do we turn to a battery? So this is really the intersection here of four major market factors simultaneously. The more traditional utilities, which now have innovative pricing models. Then we have the battery and storage companies. Then we have the solar and wind companies. And then finally, we have the building owners with their incumbent BAS system. So just in quick summary here, if I'm a BAS service provider, I need to be matching the sophistication of the energy buyer in terms of where they're going. I need to be talking about where my products are heading to be able to help them satisfy the issues of budget uncertainty, the fact that their buildings are running out of control, and their energy spend is not really something they can effectively manage, because their energy spend is not simply rooted in energy efficiency. It has everything to do with these other market sectors. So I just wanted to introduce this perspective into the conversation, because in so doing, it sidesteps most of the issues that have been discussed to date about finding the right person in the C-suite who understands how to leverage the BAS and is willing to make that investment. So Northbridge advises the BAS companies in the space along these lines to help them understand how to approach the energy buyer and be able to have an effective product offering that speaks their language. And I know some of you have been down that road with me, Jim Lee and Anno, kicking and screaming. We've worked with a lot of customers in that market.
So is the point here that there's sort of different stories at different phase of the customer sort of understanding of the issue? Is that one way of looking at this? Things evolve, different stories need to be told at different times. Is that the?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the complex sale, right? That Scott was referring to, right? It's a complex process. I think, interestingly enough, Roger, I don't know if we picked up on it, but Roger threw out an interesting challenge. You know, one of the challenges in our space and you know, what Leighton's going through, the C-suite doesn't go to the conferences we go to, right? All the events and everything else, although nobody goes to any conferences today, but anyway, there's a challenge, right? How do you educate, back to your point, how do you educate the market, the C-suite guys, that these sort of solutions and technologies and companies like we have here are available and can do these things, and the stuff that Leighton's got, you know, how do you go find out about that stuff? And we haven't really been attracting them. You know, there's a couple that's on the edge. They're Realcomm, kind of works on the edge because they get the realty IT guys who kind of spill over into the other area. And I think so, yeah. I mean, an outreach, education, or some venue or some approach, you know. So I'll throw that challenge to you, Anto. We've got a new way, find a new way of reaching out to these guys.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess the question is, who is the person we're looking at? Is it the tenant? Is it the REIT? You know, is it, you know, who is that person now? Is you know, going to be making those decisions? So those things have changed from, you know, where we were, and companies owned buildings and did it themselves. You know, if they own a building today, they sell it and lease it back or something. But you know, it's narrowed down the field to the people that you've got to get to. But you know, probably now there's a lot more to do with the tenants, but those tenants are going to be in there for shorter periods, perhaps now too.
I think that that it matters a lot as to what the enterprise actually does. If you're in real estate, if you're in property management, things that are materially related to facilities, you can have a compelling value proposition for the C-suite. But I think after doing this for a long time, you reach a certain maturity level where you realize that energy, HVAC, is just not material to what these guys do. So there are plenty of times, if you're looking at an insurance company at their operations side of their business, energy is going to be less than 1% of what they do overall. They might just not be interested. So when you're talking about the C-suite, you have to focus on a C-suite at least where you have some materiality to affecting their business.
It's the JLL thing, the 330, 300 thing you're talking a little bit about there, Jim. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point, Jim, but somebody's buying the energy at 1% or not. A university might be $60 million a year. What is 10% of that, or even 1% of that, to improve the BAS system as an offset? That's really where the conversation is. It's not really more complicated than that.
No, I agree, Leighton. It's just in certain verticals, you're just going to get into a situation where it's not something they care about right now. And understanding that and moving on is an equally important skill.
So as we sort of come to the last few minutes of this particular show, we've discussed a lot of the aspects of the C-suite. How important is this, and in comparison to some of the other issues, such as kind of structurally in terms of CapEx, OpEx kind of things, and technology and a whole bunch of other stuff? Does this rise to the top as being something that will sort of allow us to break through, or is this an enabler, or where does this meaning trying to get to the C-suite, trying to get the right message to the C-suite, where does this fall in the list of priorities for us as a group, as an industry?
I think something that Jim brought up earlier is that, you know, the decision making has moved up, you know, from where people lower down were able to make it, and now even if it's a small amount of money, you need the C-suite signature. The rest of the people almost become influencers, and so they're all still important, because someone's got to internally convince the C-suite. But at the end of the day, he's going to sign the order or the check or give the okay to do it. It becomes important, significant.
Do we agree?
Yeah, I think that I agree with that. Everybody's the decision making is moving up, further up the chain, and sort of back to my earlier point, I'm not sure we're doing any awareness outreach to those guys. What's being done is being done by, you know, people who are doing it on a onesie twosie basis. So I don't know that those people are aware of what's possible, what can be done beyond what we teach them, you know, one-on-one.
I would like to add, I think it's going to be a challenge if any of us think that we can make this change individually as companies in the mindset.
Right.
We need to find collective ways to invest to do this together, whether it be through the trade organizations that we're already participating in, or CABA, as some of the people in the chat had talked about, or collectively, you know, we organize something as a group of companies that have these kinds of models available. It's just got to be something that comes from, it can't be a sales pitch from a company. It's got to be an educational move from a group of, or from an industry.
It could be that it needs to be hooked into something that does become significant for them in the 300 thing. Hey, it's the staff and the well-being, and this is what you need as part of your well-being, because, you know, if we're part of that, the value chain, then that makes, at least brings us to the party.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, it's top of the hour. I think this has been a great conversation. We'll definitely follow up on this and all the other things that we talked about. So I thank everybody, all the attendees for being here, and all of the panelists for contributing. The video of this will be up online sometime later on tonight. And we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Monday Live. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.